Life is Strange Double Exposure is here at last, a brand new game in the Life is Strange series that allows you to play as the original protagonist, Max Caulfield, in a new adventure set roughly 10 years after the original Life is Strange game. And there's a lot to like about this game, but I do also have some gripes with it as well. So I've got some pros and cons to talk about, settling in my overall score, which I will explain throughout this video, as roughly a 6.5 to maybe 7 out of 10. So I'm going to talk about all my reasoning for that. There will be a spoiler-free section at the start of this video, and as you'll see, there are time markers for a bunch of different categories. Everything past this one, the spoiler-free section, will contain spoilers, and I will also in the process spoil some events of Life is Strange Season 1. Despite what I've heard from Deck9, I do not believe you should play this game if you haven't played Season 1. I think you really will miss out on a lot of key information and references and tie-ins if you don't play that first season. I don't imagine there are many people out there who haven't played it, but if you are one of those people, you can pick up the base game, the whole of Season 1 for dirt cheap these days, even when it's not on sale, so please go do that first and then pick up this game. And also thank you very much to Square Enix, who are kind enough to give me a review copy for this game ahead of time. It's not stopped me from buying the game myself. I've got a Steelbook edition that's about an hour away on Amazon, and I've got a collector's box that just came today, which is really cool, as a vinyl and everything. Love it, very happy. So I'm really grateful just for them to give me that early access to get this review out. That made a world of difference for my content, and I'm so grateful to them for that. And also, very quickly, if you are new to this channel and you'd like to see me do some video game reviews like this, I'm most known for Payday content, but I do occasionally do videos on other games that I'm interested in talking about, and it's something I'd like to try and explore more in the coming months and years. So if you want to see more games from me, please do click subscribe and leave a comment down below. Let me know what upcoming games you'd like to see me talk about. I'm more than happy to do reviews on whatever it may be, as long as it's a title I'm at least somewhat interested in. So without any further ado, let's talk about Life is Strange Double Exposure, everything I liked and everything I didn't. So as I said earlier, this is a follow-up to the original Life is Strange Season 1 that came out in 2015. It allows you to play as Max Caulfield again, who originally in the first game could rewind time, and there were a lot of antics surrounding that, but this time she's back with a slightly evolved power. Rather than being able to rewind time, she's able to bounce between two different timelines. It all begins when one of her closest friends, Safi, is killed in very suspicious circumstances, and the entire game story unfolds from there. But focusing on Max herself to begin with, I really like what they've done with her character. There's been a lot of debates online, a lot of arguments, and some general toxicity in the Life is Strange community over the last 2 or 3 weeks, especially since the early access began for the Ultimate Edition, and I know there will be people who feel very differently about Max's portrayal in this game, but for me, as someone who absolutely adores the first game, it's one of my favourite games of all time, I love her character and relate to her quite a lot. I think what they've done with her in this game is really good. I think she feels matured in a believable way, feels like a good evolution of the character, even if some of the decisions you can make as her don't really line up with that. It is a choice-based game, so you just go for the things that feel more fitting to you or to Max, however you play the game, but I think that she's portrayed really well. She looks good, she sounds good. Hannah Tell really lands a brilliant performance as Max, the best one she's given yet as the character by a country mile. I think she's fantastic. She's inserted into a world that is quite interesting, even if story-wise, it's not the best narrative in the world, and that is my biggest gripe with this game and why I've given it a 6.5 to 7 out of 10, but I'm getting ahead of myself slightly. This game is set within a new educational setting. This time it's Caledon University in Vermont, a really cool setting. The world feels lived in. There aren't too many different locations you can explore. I would have liked maybe a couple of extra spaces. Max is basically the artist in residence of Caledon University for a year, and she's delivering seminars and workshops whilst also living next to the campus. And I'd have loved to have seen her workshop space, or even have her deliver a seminar, maybe like how Jefferson was doing a lecture at the start of Life is Strange 1. I'd have loved to have seen something like that from Max's perspective. That could have been really cool. But generally, the settings are really good. There's a good cast of characters, all feeling quite unique, even if some of them are less interesting than others, and in particular, the biggest offense being some of the best characters like Moses and Amanda being one of the romance options. They could have had more going on for them. Moses kind of feels like Warren in Life is Strange Season 1, where he's there, he's kind of like one of the main protagonists, but isn't quite at that level the way Max and Chloe are. He's there in a lot of key places, but I would have liked to have had more time with him directly to get to know him a lot better. So it's a good setting with good characters. I just feel like I could get a little bit more from some of them. I feel like there could be a bit more to explore there, and I feel like that's definitely something that could have been touched up, basically. Visually, it's the best Life is Strange has ever looked. The colour palettes are really strong, especially because you can jump between two timelines, one being one where Safi is dead and one being one where she's alive, and even the colour tones, the warm versus cold of living versus dead, are really noticeable and come across really well. I love how it's all organised there. And soundtrack-wise, the game is fantastic as well. There's a couple of audiobooks here and there I will talk about in a minute, but it's the best that Life is Strange has ever looked or sounded objectively on the whole. I think there's some really strong stuff here, and Deck9 have really aced it on both the visuals and the sound. But as I've said, the story is the main letdown, so I want to just touch on that very briefly. And I want to say that first off, the opening 2 chapters, which people could play already as part of the Ultimate Edition, are the best of the game. They are really strong. There's a lot to them. It takes me about 2 to 3 hours to play each one, and there's a lot of exploration, a lot of character interaction, and a lot of really good setup for what could be a really, really strong story. Even chapter 3, to an extent, has some really good stuff to it, but I feel personally the plot, for lack of a better word, collapses in chapters 4 and 5. There's a bit of a twist in chapter 3 going into chapter 4, and it feels like the story kind of has to take a turn to accommodate it, and the turn that it takes has me sat there thinking, is this all we're gonna do? It doesn't feel like we're getting towards some grand conclusion, and it does rehash some elements from the first game, but in a less creative way to me, where I feel like they had an idea for some of the things they want to do with the plot, and then struggle to figure out what to do as a result of those ideas, if that makes sense. Sounds really harsh, but I'm just used to some very strong narratives, especially from Deck 9 as well as Don't Nod. They've both done really good stories with Life is Strange, so I just feel with this one, it's not quite to the same level, especially in the latter chapters, personally. It's even valid by runtime, really. I mean, I've played through the game twice before making this video, and it took me about 3 hours to play chapters 4 and 5 on my second run, whereas I spent about that long in chapter 1 or chapter 2. There's just a lot less going on in the back half of the game compared to the starting half. And there are just some plot threads that could have been used a lot more. There's a puzzle box you can interact with in chapter 1 where you solve a little thing to do with this university's version of the Vortex Club called the Abraxas Society. You crack the puzzle box, another one comes out, and then the guy who gives you the box just goes, it's your problem, you deal with it. And unless I've missed something, you never get a chance to deal with it again. Maybe I've missed a detail, and if occasionally I do get things wrong, please bear in mind I've played this early. There's no YouTube guides, no guidebook to things I might have missed that I can consult. So if you see things that are slightly wrong in this video, please do correct me, and I encourage people to check the comment sections in case there are anything I need to add. I'll do it in a pinned comment, so keep an eye out for that. But yeah, overall, story just feels lacking, and that's what's reduced the score so much. It would also be very remiss of me to not mention the Polaroid sections of this game, where you can take pictures of different characters in the game using a Polaroid Now Gen 2 camera, an actual official Polaroid camera in the game. I know some people felt it was a bit strange to have actual promos in this game, but both the Doc Martin and Polaroid ones make sense. I mean, was anyone ever calling the instant camera in Life is Strange anything other than a Polaroid? I certainly wasn't. But it was just cool to take pictures with a Polaroid camera that was an official one, and also using the double exposure feature, which was the title of the game, but an actual photography trick of combining 2 images and overlaying them over each other. On top of that, without spoiling it, the use of double exposure actually is quite integral to the story, and I was really happy with what they did with that. It was one of the better parts of that last chapter. So yeah, I had to just mention that. Love what they did with the Polaroids. Really cool stuff. But in terms of technical things, just very briefly, there's also some issues where audio doesn't quite land the way it should. While it sounds really good, the game, there are some scenes where there feels like the soundtrack missing, where there should be some background music, and sometimes the background music will be so loud you can't quite hear the dialogue. Doesn't happen tons, but I noticed it a couple of times and thought that could do with some tweaking, and may well get tweaked within the first week of it being out. Performance mode also on Xbox was a little bit shaky. I couldn't get a solid 60 FPS in the opening chapter for the Xbox Series X on performance mode at 60, so I ended up playing in quality mode, which is not something that I tend to do. I'm much more of a frame rate kind of guy, but I have to admit, in a game like this, 30 FPS is perfectly fine and runs really well. I really like the quality mode, and that's the preferable way to play this game, at least personally. But beyond that, I've only got a couple of small performance gripes. There's some bits, especially in the last chapter, where there are several scenes that just cut to black in between them that feel incredibly jarring. And there's also a scene in chapter 2 when someone's having a panic attack, and for some reason while they're having it, you can hear ice cracking in the background, and it's not a tease for something, it's just there for some reason, and then it's gone. Feels like that's a bug. But overall, spoiler free, like I said, there's a lot to like about this game visually, audibly, and in its characters and setting, but there's that little bit that just kind of makes you want to peer further in to see what else there is to the game, and I don't feel like, especially in the latter half, it offers you enough of the answers to the questions that you want answering. If you're interested to get a new game with Max in a cool setting with some cool characters, I think you'll enjoy what you get with this game. But if you ride or die on the narrative, it's harder for me to recommend it, because I've come out of it having played it twice feeling like I'm interested to see where they go, because without spoiling it too much, they've left it open for a sequel. I'll go more direct on that later in the video. So maybe when it's all said and done and there's a future game that ties into this, it'll all feel like a bigger piece of a wider puzzle. But who knows? Right now, it feels a little bit of a hollow ending, at least for me. So let's get into it. Let's do spoilers. As I've said, everything is chapter marked, so you can see everything as we go through. And the story section, which I'm going to focus on now, feels like the most jumbled up section. I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to organize this, so let's just go right through it. The game is pitched to you as a murder mystery where Safi is killed and the killer's going to strike again in both timelines. That's not true. It's not true at all. It's a complete misdirect. The killer is not going to strike again in either of the timelines because you find out at the end of Chapter 2, if you've played the Ultimate Edition, and again, I've said spoilers, so no more warnings, that Max is the person who kills Safi. You see a photo of her aiming a gun at Safi right before she dies, and in Chapter 3's opening, it's confirmed that's not a Photoshop. It genuinely is her. Obviously, we're not playing as someone who's going to start being a serial killer, so you know right off the bat there, the killer's not going to strike again. So at that point, going into Chapter 3, that kind of breaks down the entire plot that you're pitched with this game. Now, I don't normally mind plot misdirects as long as what we get in its place is something that feels deserving of being kept secret for the sake of a better story. I just don't know if I love the misdirect here because what we get in the resulting chapters just isn't quite as strong as the concept that was pitched. Chapters 1 and 2 set up Kaladin and give you some ideas for who to trust and who not to. You get the cliffhanger with Max aiming the gun at Safi, and it's honestly the most memeable photo ever. That's going to be a Discord sticker in my server in the coming days. I'm honestly confident of it. I also love as well that Safi's death isn't how Chapter 1 ends. That was one thing that annoyed me with True Colours, was that the whole first chapter was leading up to a spoiler that they told you from the very first trailer that Gabe was going to die. So I love here that Safi dies in the opening 30 minutes to an hour, and then you've got a good bit of time in Chapter 1 to really build off of that. It's not leading to something you know is coming for very long. But then you get Chapter 3, which does throw you back with some really cool nods to Life is Strange 1 with jumping through a photo, the hints of a storm when powers get out of control, some really, really good stuff there, and some investigation scenes. Some choices that you made in the earlier chapters show a couple of ripple effects, even though it's not as strong as I'd like, and there's even a really strong romance scene, which does have some ickiness around it that I'll get to, but some really good structure and writing there, and the cliffhanger at the end that Safi, who was murdered in one timeline, is actually a shapeshifter. She's got powers like Max. All of that in the first 3 chapters I really, really love. But once you get to Chapter 4, it gives me the impression that Deck 9 kind of came up with the Safi shapeshifter and Max gun ideas, and then had to try and figure out a way to go on from there. How do we get to Max with the gun? They're the areas that I don't think work as well, because it suddenly becomes an investigation as to why a book that Safi was writing got canned into a freshman friend that Safi had a few years ago committing suicide, and a literature professor in Kaladin, someone we've met called Lucas Calmanero, stealing her work and branding it as his own. And Chapter 4 is just bringing him down. Suddenly it's not a murder investigation, it's a guy who plagiarized a dead student's work getting called out at a roast in a bar. It's just not the same strength. It doesn't feel earned. It's not something we're working to, and it doesn't have some big finale after that. He just ends up revealing to Safi that actually Safi's mum is the one who got the book deal canned. And even then, when there's a conversation between Safi and her mum, it doesn't feel like that has a lot of gravitas to it. I feel like I'm missing some necessary exposition as to why I should care enough about that reveal, if that makes sense. And then Chapter 5 is just a nostalgia tour. It's basically Life is Strange 1's final episode all over again, where Max goes through a huge nightmare sequence in order to pad out the runtime. Because all that happens in Chapter 5 is Max tries to stop Safi from using her powers, then Safi says she's got to be killed in order to keep the loop and, make sure that she can't abuse her powers because she feels remorseful for the damage that she's done. Max says no because she's not having the same choice that she had in the first game, which honestly, good writing, I back that. But after saving everyone as a result of Safi's powers and the impact she's caused, Safi suddenly goes from being remorseful to being a villain, wanting to be all-powerful with her powers, basically act like a god, asks if Max wants to join her, and then that's it. There's an ending in the bar where Max explains to everyone what happened, and we get a mid-credit scene of Safi recruiting someone else who's revealed to have powers, someone in the game called Diamond, who you don't get a lot of time with. They walk off screen, and it pops up saying Max Caulfield will return. Yeah, Life is Strange is basically trying to do a Marvel, and the first time I finished the game, I rolled my eyes into the back of my head, didn't really like it. Upon replay, I'm still not the biggest fan of it. Life is Strange is not a game that you need to make into an MCU. It's just not. It never has been that. But I have to admit, the idea of carrying on that story, I'm intrigued by. I just don't like that it's being set up as some kind of big superpowered universe. It gives me the impression we're going to get loads of characters coming back, and if that's the case, I don't know how I feel about that. I'm not going to go too far in that because we'll wait and see what happens with the reception of this game and confirmation of a double exposure too. But as long as things go well enough for Deck 9 and Square Enix, that seems like their plan. And I don't know how I feel about that. Like I said, it starts really strong. You've got real supernatural Life is Strange vibes, and then at the end, it just loses a lot of that flow. At least to me. As you're playing though, you've got your typical choices with a story-based game, and I do think in Life is Strange Double Exposure, they matter the least they ever have mattered. The reason that hasn't reduced my mark too much is because I've never really cared that much about the choices having an impact. To me, the purpose of the choices is to, in that moment, make you panic and go, what's the right thing to do? What should I do here? What are those short-term consequences? And to the most part, it still delivers that for me. The final choice is terrible because it's Safi saying, hey, I want to be a god, will you join me? And Max just says yes or no, and it doesn't impact the ending in any real real way, apart from a couple of dialogue line changes. But overall, I don't care too much that the choices didn't have too much of a branching narrative. I'd have liked more. Besides a couple of little small dialogue and character behavior changes in chapters 3 and 4, I can't really see much that changes, and that's coming from someone who's played in two directions, going opposite choices every time. I don't see that much of a ripple effect across it. So if you want some kind of Kate Marsh equivalent where you can talk someone down from dying and then have a scene with them later to compensate, that's not in this game. But I haven't got much more to say on that, so I'll move on from that, because for me, that's not a big problem, but I know for some of you it will be. What is a big problem for me is the romance section, because romance is something that I think is very important in Life is Strange games, especially LGBT romance is a huge part of this game's identity, and the romance in Life is Strange Double Exposure is the best and worst for different reasons. It's the best because I really love what they do with Amanda with regards to Max. Max and Amanda as a lesbian relationship, really well written. Amanda's a great character, even if we don't get enough time with her, as I've said earlier. She's got great scenes with Max in both Chapter 1 and Chapter 3 where the date scene happens. It's very well written, it's very fun, and I really like the energy of it, especially as someone in their mid to late 20s. I can kind of see the energy there, and I can kind of understand it and relate to it, and I like what it's doing there, even if I'm not personally a lesbian. I can see some of the relatability to it, basically. But the problem is the other romance, Vin, I'll be completely honest, feels like he was added in for the sake of it. Because Vin is the male love interest, but even up to the point where you're supposed to romance him, he's one of the suspects that's causing the trouble with Safi. He's one of the people who has stuff to hide. Why would I then want to romance him? Personally, I just don't see what the appeal is there. I don't get it. Vin as a character is perfectly fine, but there's like scenes with him where he's like asking Max if she wants to be sexy with him, that kind of having a drink and having a chat, which felt a bit strange. And then there's this smash or pass game they have that lead into them making out if they want to, but that doesn't land at all. You've got a really great scene with Amanda, and then a character romance with Vin that makes no sense and feels like it's there so you have an extra option. I don't like what they've done there at all. And I think it's kind of funny that the game almost is aware of that, because when Max and Amanda have their first kiss, Max's first thought is to ask when Amanda gets off her shift as a bartender, whereas with Vin, he's asking Max to go back with her, and she has to come up with a reason not to go with him. But what's even weirder, though, is that both these romances happen in different timelines, and there is a wider point you can make that with these characters, it's harder to get attached to them because you have two different versions of a lot of them at any one time, so you don't really know what kind of progressions you're making with them. But the worst part is that Amanda's romance scene is very uncomfortable when you realise the context of it. You can ask Amanda out in one of the very opening scenes of this game, which was a nice twist, and I love what they did with that, but you ask her out in the original timeline before Safi dies. Safi then dies, and Amanda says, "You're in no fit state to date, we're not ready for that, let's stay as friends, and maybe we'll revisit it down the line," which is very healthy. Max agrees, love what they do there. As a result, when you go to the living world, Amanda, who has no idea that you're grieving for Safi being dead, then wants to go out with you still because she doesn't know any better, and so you then date her with this greatly written romance scene as the same character who 2 chapters ago said, "Hey, romance isn't a good idea, you're right." It feels incredibly icky. It's kind of like, hey, you shut me down, so I'm going to go to another universe where actually she'll get off with me. It's very weird, and that's why it kind of compromises that. There's a great scene ruined by the outside nature of it, and it is picked up on later at the end of the story. The 2 timelines converge and you get the best version of every character, and Amanda does call you out and say it's an arsehole move to be like, "I'm not going to date you," to "I'm going to," with 2 different versions, and I have both those memories in my head. Both romances get cut off by the end of the game. They have no happy ending for either of them. Is that a tease for the future of the game? Maybe it is. Maybe because they're setting up a sequel with Max, they don't want to leave a relationship tied to her. I don't know. But I came out of the romance feeling like it wasn't worth doing, which is an important part of Life is Strange, and that really, really sucks, because we got a great character and a great romance scene that's marred by everything around it. It's a shame. But the next category I have to talk about as someone who is a big fan of Chloe Price is Chloe's character herself, and also Life is Strange 1's ending. So let's just hit this head on. Chloe is not in Life is Strange Double Exposure. If you pick the Save Chloe ending at the start of the game when you recap the events, it doesn't matter that much. Chloe's alive, and you can see a couple of updates on like their little Facebook message board type system as to what she's doing on the other side of the country. One of the things being hanging out with Victoria Chase, of all people. But Chloe doesn't appear. There is a breakup that happens off screen in between these 2 games. Max and Chloe go on road trips for a few years before Chloe leaves Max without even having an argument from the look of it, and just leaving a note that she sends to her months afterwards because Max was stuck in the past and Chloe wants to move forward. Now, while I understand that, and I honestly do get what they're going for here, I know a lot of people don't, but genuinely with the level of trauma those 2 have from that first game, doesn't matter what they say about always being with them forever, Time can change things, and I do believe that that trauma could end up splitting them up. However, that's not really what I want to see with these characters, and it certainly isn't something I want to see off screen, especially with no real chance for redemption throughout the game. Chloe does text Max at the end of the game when there's been this storm that she has to get through, much like the first game, and Max just doesn't reply, not that we see anyway. So maybe at some point we will see what happens there, maybe Chloe will come back, but just her presence and not presence in this game is so strange. There are several scenes that she could appear in as a Save Chloe ending person that she just doesn't. There's a flashback in the motel they stay in together, or that Max stays in her own if you obviously save the bay, but there's a perfect place there for her to show up. There's some other places in the game, even at the ending, it could be that everyone turns around and Chloe walks in, she's there for Max when she really needed her. There could be anything like that, and it would have been really nice, but she doesn't appear. The only time we do hear something from Chloe are some lines from Season 1, which weirdly enough are re-recorded, they're not archival. It's Rihanna DeVries' performance as Chloe and not Ashley Birch's. Ashley Birch played Chloe in Life is Strange 1 and the farewell episode of Before the Storm, whereas Rihanna DeVries played Chloe in Before the Storm's main game, because Ashley Birch was on the SAG-AFTRA strike of that time, and then also reprised the role as Chloe in the Wavelengths DLC episode for True Colours. And that made sense because it was with Steph, a character who had only been around Rihanna DeVries' Chloe. But when you're doing a game about Max, hearing Rihanna's voice doesn't work for me. Even in Farewell, they brought back Hannah and Ashley together, so it's a bit jarring to hear Rihanna deliver lines in a game that is Hannah tells Max's game. It's odd. So if you're a Chloe lover like me, that's also going to wear you out, and that's one thing why when I finished the game for the first time, I had to replay the game again to get over that and play it as a Save Arcadia Bay person to really objectively study the game. At the end of the game, Moses does ask Max if she's ready to go back to Chloe or to Arcadia Bay, obviously context dependent, and she says that she thinks she will at some point in the future, which again ties to the sequel bait, and again, as I've said, maybe when the next game comes out, whenever it does, things will make a lot more sense. I don't know. So if you don't think Max getting her own game is enough, which I do think it is, I think it's perfectly fine that Max gets her own game. I think that's absolutely fine, and I like what they've done with it for the most part. If you're waiting for Chloe to show up, she's not coming. I also briefly want to talk about the Ultimate Edition content. There are some outfits you can get in the game if you get the Deluxe or Ultimate Edition versions of this game. The outfits are all really, really cool. My only gripe with them is that you pick them in combinations of indoor and outdoor look, and they're very strange combinations because the indoor version might have Max with face paint and green hair, whereas the outdoor version might have her normal hair and no face paint. And so literally between scenes in a chapter, Max can go from looking like she's just gone for a nice, lovely, awesome walk to suddenly being a zombie in a bar. I think it would have been nice if you could have picked your individual outdoor and indoor outfits separate to each other at any one time. I wonder if they could still do that post-launch. And the cat content, that's the big part of the Ultimate Edition, not worth the price of Ultimate in my personal opinion. The cat shows up a few times across the game in small couple-minute scenes, and supposedly you're meant to find the owner by the end of the game. I have tried, and I think I've got it wrong, because the cat ends up with Moses, and it doesn't feel like a satisfying conclusion to that. Maybe there's more to it, we'll find out, but in terms of runtime, if you're wondering about getting the Ultimate Edition, I don't think you need it for this game. The biggest plus was getting to play those 2 episodes early, which is a tactic I'm not a fan of, especially for story-based games where if you want people to theorize, you should release them episodically anyway, not pay-gate it. Getting the base game is absolutely fine for this. You don't need the Ultimate Edition content. The cat stuff should just be in the game at base, but you don't miss out on much with it not being there at all. But there you go. Those are my thoughts on Life is Strange Double Exposure. I had a lot to say, as you can tell, and overall, while I have a lot of criticisms for this game, I did still enjoy getting to play as Max again, and I can really see the work that went into this in every department, even in the narrative when it didn't land. I don't feel like this was some kind of cash grab. That's the biggest question some people had. If they brought back Max, could it have been any character and they just labeled it as Max? No, this feels like a very unique to Max game. I just don't think the quality of the story itself lives up to what her character deserves, if that makes sense. Double Exposure is a very mixed bag that has some great stuff, but also some weaknesses that Life is Strange games typically haven't had before, and I hope that in whatever future game we get for Life is Strange Double Exposure, whether it's a direct Double Exposure 2 or Life is Strange Return to Arcadia Bay, which is entirely possible because even in the Save Chloe ending, the town has been rebuilt, it's been said in the story, so it's easily possible. Who knows what we'll get? I guess we'll find out. But either way, thank you for watching this video, and thank you again Square Enix for giving me a copy of the game, despite the fact that I didn't love every part of it. I'm very grateful to have had this preview, and I hope to work with these guys again in whatever else Life is Strange does. I'm a huge Life is Strange fan, that will always be the case. I'm excited to see what they do in the future. I just hope that it isn't quite as MCU-y as the end credits seem to tease, because like I said, not amazingly jazzed about that, but we'll see what everyone thinks, see what the devs do, and go from there. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all very soon with a new video on Payday 3's next game update. Look after yourselves, stay safe, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.